Hello YouTube. I found the story that I promised you. It has no name, but it will be a good one. The story that I'm going to tell may or may not be true, but it is scary. Mind you, it happened years before I was born. Back when my dad was a young boy, so I may not have all the facts. It happened in a small town on the coast. It was a small fishing and shrimping town where not much has happened since the Civil War. The year was 1961, and the hippie movement was just getting started. It was late in the winter, and a small snowstorm was just picking up. In the early morning, the time was 5:35 a.m. when most people were still in bed. To tell you how the story began, I must go back a little ways in time, a day or two before. The house that the family that we are going to talk about lived about 3.5 miles off of Main Street in a 3-story home from the early 1800s. There in the house lived the Philmans, a family of 4 and their 19-year-old niece. They were still asleep in bed when the event had happened. They were sound asleep. But 2 days before, Mr. Philman, who owned one of the older shrimping businesses in the south parts of the town, had found out that his wife was having an affair with his best friend and business partner. When he asked Mrs. Philman if the stories were true, she said yes and began to cry. He then went to work the next day and confronted his best friend, whose name was John Jackson. When John Jackson admitted to it after had been probed and prodded with the question, Mr. Philman then said to him to please leave, pack up his stuff, and he was to be fired immediately. Mr. Philman said to him as he walked out the door that the affair was to be over. And as John Jackson left the building, he saw Mrs. Philman walking up to it. She stopped him and said they were not to see each other anymore because she wanted to keep her family together at any cost. So he left sad and depressed. That night, it now being the night of the terrible tragedy, well, their niece was upstairs in her room having smoking some grass, as it was called back then, listening to some loud rock and roll as the family was downstairs on the 3rd and 2nd floor sleeping. Her room being in the top attic, well, she loved it the best. She was sitting at a window smoking the joint. Down in she had the music so loud that she was unaware of the noise coming from downstairs in the living room, off that she could not that she was unable to hear because of her music. In the living room, there came a crashing of glass and a unlocking of a door. When the guy comes in, we find that it was John Jackson, Mr. Philman's best friend and ex-business partner. He walks in to the living room, close to the steps. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a revolver. He checks the cylinder to make sure it has all the cartridges. He then puts it back in his jacket. He then walks quietly and stealthily up the steps to the second floor. He then stops just outside a bedroom and checks all the rooms and comes to find where the Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, Philip Philman's sleep. He quietly opened the door, walked in, pulled out his gun. He aimed it at Mr. Philman and said, "This is what you get for breaking up my happy, loving relationship." As Mr. Philman wakes up, Jackson pulls the trigger. He shoots him dead with 2 shots, and in the process waking Mrs. Philman up from a peaceful dream. She screams. He pulls the trigger twice on her. He then goes outside, closes the door. He sees the 2 kids at the top of the steps. He walks up the steps as the kids run to their room. They hide in the back closet of the room. As he busts through the door, he looks under their bed. He then looks behind the doors. He finds them in the closet while they were hiding. He then pulls the trigger 1 time for each of them. When he comes out of the room, we must venture up to see what the niece was doing. She had just heard the last 2 gunshots, or what she thought was something banging open. She turns her music down, walks to the phone, and dials 911. She then hides under the bed after she had locked her bedroom door. It being the attic, it had a lock on the inside and outside of the door. She locked it. She hid under the bed as the policeman said that they would be around in 4 or 5 minutes. So, back to Mr. Jackson, old man with the gun. He heals the lock of the attic door, goes up, kicks it in, or tries to. It takes about 4, 5, or 6 times for him to get through to where he can pull it open. He looks in the closet, being the last place he found the 2 kids. He then looks under the bed and finds the niece. She is screaming at this point as he takes out his hunting knife and reaches in and tries to grab her arm. She picks up a pencil that was next to her that had fallen behind the bed and stabs him in the arm. He brings his arm out and reaches in with the other, the one with the knife, and starts to cut her as she lays up against the wall, with the bed being pushed all the way to the wall. As this is going on, the policemen had just arrived. They'd searched the whole premises and had just entered the house. In the process, a young deputy had found the 2 bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Philman, and another had found the 2 kids. The one that found the two kids was hearing scuffling in the attic, so he goes up the steps to it and sees the man on the floor with the knife as he tries to cut the girl. He then pulls out his revolver and says to freeze, and he's under arrest. As the man, who is known as Jackson, comes up with the knife, he then charges the officer. The officer puts a bullet straight above his left eye, stopping him dead. As the officer turns around and sees the chief coming up the steps, he says, "I had no choice. I had to stop him to save the little girl." The niece was brought outside, wrapped in a blanket, and the bodies were already laid out on the lawn, waiting for the ambulance to come by to pick them up. As the time goes on, the niece gets worse and worse in her ability to stay calm. She is being put into a mental hospital, and later dies in bed from suicide. They say she died because she was unable to realize what has happened to her family. She is now a spirit and is hopefully at peace. But there again, I have said this story may or may not be true, but I hope it was scary enough for you being Halloween. Have a nice day. Goodbye.